Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2041 to 2042 offseason is underway. We've moved forward a couple of days since the last episode, and we have made some trades as we try to improve the financial situation of our Oakland A's while also hopefully ensuring that we remain a competitive team. Appreciate all of the thoughts that have been shared in the comments section to the last couple episodes about what we should do. And we'll get in shortly to the moves that we have made. I tend to think there's going to be some naysayers around all of the trades. Sometimes when we make trades, the feedback is pretty universally positive. And I don't feel like these trades are going to get that same reaction from some members of the worldwide scouting department. But clearly, I think they were the right thing to do, or what I wanted to do, or I clearly would not have done them. And this first trade is one that I think may elicit the most negative reaction from the worldwide scouting department, or at least some members of the worldwide scouting department, because I don't think it's debatable that we gave up the best potential player in this trade. But it's still a deal that I wanted to make. I'll walk you through it. We have shipped away our former closer, Chuck Huntley, who is due to make over $7 million this year as he heads into arbitration. As we've talked about a lot with him, he's lost almost 10 miles an hour in velocity off of his fastball over the last year and a half or so, despite having no significant injuries. Basically, he's a 26-year-old whose career just seems to be spiraling in a negative direction, and he's getting expensive, so we included him in the trade. We also included a minor league pitcher, J.J. Meek. Looks like he could be a useful right-handed reliever, but the 22-year-old hadn't made it above high A ball in our organization. Does throw in the triple digits, so another useful prospect, although I don't think he's necessarily a big-time player. And the controversial part might be shipping away Jesus Salceda, potential 4.5-star ceiling prospect. You may remember him. He is the guy that we picked up in the trade with the Cardinals about 2.5 years ago when we traded away the outfielder Mike Alanis and starting pitcher Ken Yohannes, and picked up the very young prospect from the Cardinals organization. And he is absolutely an interesting prospect. Finally, although he started his career in the Cardinals organization where they promoted him from the international complex to the DSL earlier than I typically would have, he did finally have a solid year last year in the DSL at 18 years old, hitting .300 with league average OPS plus and WRC plus. I think he could be an outstanding power hitter with solid speed and a good defensive outfielder. But as we've talked about since we brought him on board, I don't like a lot of aspects of his personality: low leadership, low loyalty, low adaptability, and high financial ambition. Not going to be an easy player to keep with us for the long term. Not going to draw a ton of walks. And I do worry a little bit that sometimes these players that the AI for the computer-controlled teams dumps right into professional baseball when I don't think they're quite ready to thrive in the DSL. And I think we certainly see that with his first parts of his first two seasons. He had 200, 211, 167, and then 267 batting averages in the DSL with well below average WRC pluses at every stop. Certainly hasn't been an impressive start to his career, although he's stabilized, but that also just gets the clock on when these players need to be added to the 40-man roster clicking even faster once they've started playing in professional games. So between his negative personality, the kind of imperfect start he got off to his career, hasn't been someone, despite his potentially impressive skill set, that I've really been envisioning as a big part of our future. But as I said, I think he's arguably he's not arguably, if you believe our scout, he is the highest ceiling player in this deal. And we're also giving up a potential useful reliever in J.J. Meek and a guy who has been a major league closer in Chuck Huntley. But we got some cash back from the rich Yankees, which will certainly help us as we try to maintain our scouting and development budgets here for at least one more season. And we got a 22-year-old minor league shortstop in Jim West. And he's a guy that I really like, as we could be facing some additional transition in some of our middle infielders over the next couple of years. The Yankees drafted him at the end of the first round out of the University of Rhode Island in 2040. Unfortunately, he signed in September, so he didn't play at all with the Yankees. This past year, he was good in rookie ball, kind of stunk in single-A Tampa, hitting just a .188 down there. But what I like about him is he potentially has outstanding range, and definitely could envision him as a major league shortstop of the future. And if his bat fully develops, it's a bat that could be above average in everything. And he's also a left-handed hitting middle infielder, and he's a guy who will be 23 before this next season begins, who, if things go well, could potentially be helping us late in the 2043 season when some additional turnover could need to take place with the roster. And we could also be looking for some cheaper infielders. So I don't think there's any question that the ceiling for Jim West is not as high as the ceiling for Jesus Salceda, and we also had to include other resources to get him. So I get that it may not be a popular trade, but West is closer to being able to help us in the near term. And Salceda, I do question how he's really going to develop, but we will certainly put him on the short list of prospects to continue to track since we have moved on from Mr. Salceda. Jim West, as we'll talk about shortly, is already in the development lab as we're trying to jumpstart his development and his movement towards what we think will be a excellent defensive player with a good bat and kind of a unique middle infielder with a lefty bat. Can't say it's a unicorn, but definitely not something you see every day, especially someone that we think could have a pretty good bat for us. Second trade we made, shipped away Nelson Delgado, solid right-handed pitcher, made his major league debut for us this year, but he's going to be 28 years old. He's fragile physically, and most importantly, he's out of options at this point, given that he wasn't going to make, most likely, unless we have a ton of injuries, our 26-man roster, and we might not be able to put him down in AAA without anyone else grabbing him anymore. Decided it was better to just get a little bit for him, although he didn't honestly have a ton of value. Also gave up 23-year-old left-handed pitcher Juan Osorio. Osorio, potentially outstanding fastball and cutter. His stuff could be off the charts. We're worried about his control, although he only walked 9 batters in 22 innings this past year in Double-A. Did walk 16 in 28 2/3 when he started the year in high Single-A. Had an excellent season, but a low control pitcher is not necessarily something we're really after. And we needed to include some potentially useful assets in this trade. Another one that we're including, Damani Hasbury, left-handed hitting, first base, DH, corner outfield type, combined for 42 homers and 106 ribbies this year between Double-A and Triple-A. Hit .320 at both levels. So a pretty interesting offensive player, but as we talked about a couple episodes ago when we did our season recap and our minor league review and started planning for the future of this team, we've got a lot of left-handed hitting first base, corner outfield types sitting in AAA right now. We've got a surplus of those kind of guys. Hasbury, given his defensive limitations, was one that we were willing to include to get this deal done. And last but not least, minor league right-handed pitcher Zion Chisley. I think he's the least interesting player in this deal. Has the stamina to be a starter and a wide pitch arsenal, but none of those pitches are particularly good. He was fine in A-ball this year, but he's 22 years old, and it's a long trip from A-ball to the majors. So we sent 4 guys, 3 of whom likely have major league futures. The least interesting guy we got was a relief pitcher, Dimp Fracas. Don't think he's all that exciting of a prospect. Had a 4.73 ERA in A-ball this year as a 23-year-old, but he is a body for our organization. The real reason we made the trade was to pick up the minor league second baseman Juan Moreno, only 19 years old, another left-handed hitting middle infielder. Think his defense could be pretty solid, really like his speed. The bat, I think, is a little less interesting than the middle infielder that we picked up from the Yankees, although potentially really good gap power, which would pair well with his speed. Has struggled in rookie ball over the first season of his career, which was this past year in the St. Louis organization. Was slightly below average with their DSL team, and then well below average with their main team in Florida. But think that Moreno is a middle infielder who could definitely develop into an interesting prospect for us over the next few years. Since, as I talked about, Hasbury felt a little surplus, Delgado no longer had options, and Osorio, despite his outstanding stuff, I was worried about his control. We're willing to package those players together for a second baseman who we think could be a pretty important infielder for us 3 or 4 years from now if he reaches his full potential. And before we get into the last trade that we've made, we'll talk a little bit more broadly about some of the other things we're doing with the team. We've made a qualifying offer to Jorge Mendoza. Clearly the expectation is he will quickly reject that and move into free agency. We're still pursuing a potential trade of Jake Mendic, another left-handed reliever similar to us. Moving on from the left-handed reliever Huntley, I think Mendic is going to be surplus to our requirements and also getting expensive. But we're trying to scout out a couple of the players that we might get in return for Mendic, so not pulling the trigger on that deal quite yet. We have made an offer to bring Mike Gallick back for 1 more year as a potential starter for us. This is one where there were mixed views. I know Paul West was in favor of this. And Gallick at a little less than $11 million for what we'll end up needing to pay him to get him back, I think gives us some of the depth that we need in our rotation for next year. With Saldana certainly going to miss the start of the season, Camunez also coming back from an injury, and the likes of Blumenschein and Weiss in our rotation also fragile. Feel like we just need to have another arm out there that we can really count on for at least this next year. So we've made an offer to Mr. Gallick to bring him on board for 1 more year. And in the player development lab, we've got a lot of assessment going on at this point. I will say one thing I did this offseason is that I've put people into a wider variety of programs than I typically do. Those of you who've been following us over the months know that I'm trying to put I don't want to call it a database because that would be far overstating what I am doing, but I am basically just tracking how different players do in the different programs at different ages with different attributes, with different chances of success, and trying to just track down a fair amount of information on how the development lab really works that I hope to be sharing in a tutorial type episode over the next couple of months before we get to the end of OOTP 25. And my hope is that a lot of the lessons learned will still be applicable to OOTP 26 and beyond. So because of that, when I was thinking about development lab options for players this year, getting some people into some of the programs that I haven't used quite as frequently was also a factor. So from that perspective, I'm probably not optimizing how these players are going to necessarily perform in the development lab and help our team in the coming years perfectly. Some of this is just trying some different programs and getting a few more data points on some of the programs that I don't use as much. Jonah Richards, our excellent young catcher in a strength and conditioning program. Federico Ariola, going to be a Cy Young Award candidate over the next couple of weeks, working on endurance training to try to stretch him out further as a starting pitcher. The outfielder, Jesus Aguiar, and the second baseman, Phil Swenson, both working on a little more power. Juan Pimentel, plate discipline. The young center fielder, Bobby Armstrong, working on gap power. Mike Blumenshine, one of the injury-prone pitchers we've talked about, working on strength and conditioning. Baumler and Aguayo, both on secondary pitch improvement. Jacoby Manelli, plate discipline. Roque de la Paz, working on his control. Popeye Ibarra, and this is a program that you don't see all the time and that I haven't used all that frequently, but the potential big-time pitcher down the line, who I know some of you have mentioned could be a very interesting stopper or closer for us down the line. Throws 96 to 98 already, and we are going to work on hopefully improving his velocity in the development lab. The excellent young prospect Luis Villarreal, working on adding a pitch to his arsenal. David Palomares working on contact. Luis Godina, his two-strike approach. The relievers Scherer and Heilman working on pitch movement and strength and conditioning respectively. The potential two-way player Mike Homer working on bat speed. Rat Keach working on endurance training for the young reliever. And then the shortstop that we just picked up from the Yankees, Jim Clank West, working on his contact in the development lab this winter. And for our last trade, this is probably the topic that we got the most feedback on from members of the Worldwide Scouting Department, also known as our loyal viewer base. And we had mentioned when we did our mid-season review that we felt like it was probably time to move on from either infielder Amariel Cinder or infielder Alejandro Landin. They were both set to make $5 million this upcoming season and didn't necessarily see a role for both of them on our team. And we also wanted to try to continue getting the financial situation of the A's into a better spot. Kind of interesting, both YME943 and Avery Shayam felt that we should move on from Al Cinder. They rightly brought up that he is signed to a longer-term contract at this point, and the numbers on that contract are going to go up. And if he doesn't start producing better for us, that could become a more problematic contract to get out of down the line. Can't argue with that logic. Both Paul West and Peter Hooper felt that we should move on from Landin. Older, less productive. And as we saw a couple of episodes, Landin actually had a bit more value in the trade market than Al Cinder did. So I've ultimately, as you can see here, decided to move on from the longtime member of our team, Alejandro Landin, and the fans certainly not happy about it. But we will first talk through why I decided to keep Cinder instead. Cinder at this point, I think, has a better bat than Landin, and he is a similar-ish defensive player to Landin, although he doesn't have the same kind of arm. But he is younger, and over the last 2 years, admittedly in limited playing time, Cinder has been an above-average offensive player for us. I do agree that if he continues to be more of a utility guy than a true starter, that this contract could get more difficult to trade. That being said, the highest annual dollar value that he's guaranteed is $9 million 5 years from now. This is not a contract that a team like the Yankees or the Dodgers or some of the other big market teams would have serious reservations about taking on. So although I do agree the value we might receive from Psycho Cinder could continue to decline in the trade market, I don't think this is ultimately an untradeable contract. As I mentioned, I think at this point, Landin's bat is a bit better, or a bit worse than Cinder's. Landin is older, as we talked about. He's also fragile physically. Is a bit better defensively. I got to give him credit for the stronger arm. But he has been dropping off over the last few years with his WRC pluses going from 149 to 136 to 98. And his ultimate impact in terms of wins above replacement, 6.6 to 3.8 to 1.1. Although optically he looked good defensively and continues to look good defensively in terms of his ratings. He was a pretty bad shortstop this past year with a minus 9.2 zone rating and 950 defensive efficiency for us. He was extremely popular with us locally, so moving on from him, we unfortunately took another hit to fan interest, which has been spiraling downward over the course of last season, and now with some of these moves that we've made more recently. Not a critical hit, but still a hit. And we also included Joe Harmon in the trade, a guy who's still making the major league minimum, even though he's been up with us for parts of the past 3 seasons. Really like his glove, really like his influence in the clubhouse, really like his speed. The bat is fine. But he's fragile in terms of his injury proneness, and he's a right-handed hitter. And with the departure of our catcher Mendoza, the only left-handed bat that's going to be in our everyday lineup is the guy who's taking over for him at catcher, Jonah Richards, who likely will be named the AL Rookie of the Year over the next couple of weeks. And the only other left-handed bat that we even have penciled in to our roster at this point is the backup outfielder, Mr. Aguiar, who we want to be getting a little more playing time than Harmon anyways, because he's a little younger and they're both center fielders. So my thought is by trading away Harmon, that's going to open up a spot on our roster for 1 or 2 of these left-handed hitting first base, corner, infield, DH, outfield types. Think Juan Ramirez. Think the young infielder Lance, who pitched well or hit well for us in a small call-up last year. We still have McIlvain, the outfielder, in our system, and then the two-way player Mike Homer. Those guys are all left-handed bats, and moving on from Harmon certainly opens up a spot for at least one of them to be on the roster, giving us another left-handed bat we can actually use as a pinch hitter, potentially start at times. And there's a chance that, we may have more than one of them on the roster, but felt like we really needed to try to balance out left-handed versus right-handed hitters on our team, and getting Harmon out and getting what we hope is some value in return for him definitely helped. It is a risk because, as we've talked about over the last couple seasons, Minnesota is a very talented young team, even though they had a bit of a down year this past year. And we're giving them two assets that may come back to haunt us. But we got a bunch of cash in return from them in this trade. And we also brought on a pretty interesting relief pitcher, 23-year-old Bobby Surgener. Made his major league debut with Minnesota at the end of this season, put up a 3.12 ERA over 17 and a third innings pitched. But we like a lot of things about him. He is durable. He only has 42 days of major league service, so he's making the major league minimum for the foreseeable future. And a guy with plus stuff, plus control, and potentially plus movement. Good fastball, good sinker, still working on his cutter. But we think he's a guy who could definitely mix in with some of our other relief pitchers. And although we didn't really need to bring on another left-handed pitcher, even with the departure of Chuck Huntley and the pending departure of Jake Mendic, felt that the opportunity to bring Surgener on board and also get a lot of cash in return for a couple of guys who at this point are not long-term members of our organization. Landin, despite his poor year last season, is looking for about $22 million a year over 5 years in terms of an extension. So the fact that he was looking for a 9-figure deal, even as a fragile guy in his early 30s, made me think this was certainly going to be our last year with him anyways. And this gives us a player who hopefully will be an important reliever for us for several years to come. A little bit of relief as far as our financials, and we'll see what Amariel Cinder and Phil Swenson can do as they compete to likely fight for a platoon, or maybe one of them will put a stranglehold on either second base or shortstop in spring training. So that gets you caught up on what we've been doing over the first couple of days of the offseason. I mentioned we're likely going to be shipping another left-handed reliever away in Jake Mendic, but still waiting on a couple of scouting reports. With Mendic, the hope is to get a better backup catcher for Richards than we currently have with Hidetaka Ogata. Love his defense, but the bat is really bad. And he's also a guy who's set to be making more than the major league minimum now. So the hope is that we'll be able to turn Mendic into a guy who will be a backup catcher for us. But my hope when we get the scouting report back is that one of the guys we might be able to get for him is borderline starting quality, even though he'll certainly be our backup behind the excellent young prospect Jonah Richards. So we are going to keep moving things forward over the next few days, hopefully get the scouting reports that we're looking for, ultimately make a decision on what, if anything, we can get from Mendic, and then we'll get into awards season. As I said, as I think about the big awards, clearly a very disappointing year for us to be bounced in the first round after a 108-win season. But I think that Jonah Richards is almost certainly going to win Rookie of the Year. And Federico Ariola, I think it's going to be a very interesting AL Cy Young race, and interested in seeing how he turns out in there. Would certainly think that our manager, Kip Wells, after a 108-win season, would get another Manager of the Year award, but you never know. And we have started to get some of our arbitration-eligible players, as well as some of our minor league free agents signed. Jonathan Shearer and Dave Ballmer are going to be back. Mike Gallick, as we talked about, back, and slight increase to fan interest there. Kevin Carmichael coming back. Still looking for a pitching coach down in the lower levels of the minors, and looks like the guy we've been speaking with, Eddie Ahorio, looking for more money there. Phillies looking to trade for the young lefty Wilson Rangel, sending us pretty solid hitting first base prospect Frank Ariza, but don't know that that's a trade that we're going to make. And it looks like we at least did get a 1 point bump from bringing Mr. Gallic back, so better than nothing. And a couple bigger arbitration eligible guys signed. Doug Weiss, likely back for his final season, and Darnell Selvey. Amazing reaction to bringing him back in his first arbitration eligible year. So back up to 90 in terms of fan interest. So now we're slightly above where we were when the season ended. But keep in mind, we still are going to be taking a big hit whenever Mendoza leaves us, which is pretty much inevitable at this point, unfortunately. And award season is now underway, still waiting on the key scouting report that we need to decide whether or not we're going to move on from Jake Mendic for a young catcher. As expected, Arturo Uresti repeated as a Gold Glove Award winner. He is an outstanding defensive right fielder, has a cannon for an arm, and very good zone rating and defensive efficiency as well for Mr. Uresti, who second straight Gold Glove, as we noted, and had 30 homers and 103 ribbies for us while being an important member of our highly regarded offense. And after a year when, in addition to having great defense and great pitching, we also had a great offense, a couple career this season. And no surprise that Darnell Selvey now has back-to-back Silver Sluggers in left field. Put up a big 154 WRC plus for us this year as he remains a key cog in our offense. And we have gotten the scouting report back that we've been waiting for. Ron Markley, who has spent the last 2 years in the major leagues with Detroit, and we have an outstanding scout, and we invest a ton in scouting, as you know. For some reason, we had low scouting accuracy on him, and it took us a week and a half to get this report. We're now up to average, but I like what I see in Markley as far as a backup catcher. He's got a really good arm, and he's above average defensively, slightly, in terms of both blocking and framing. High loyalty and work ethic, and a respectable-ish looking bat, helped by the fact that he's got a really good eye. He's had a 101 and 92 WRC plus his first 2 years in Detroit. I don't think we're going to wait around to get to very high scouting accuracy on him, because we're going to have to make a deal for Mendic in relatively short order, given that salary arbitration is only 10 days away now, and we want to likely get him off the books before we do that. Markley, definitely not a superstar, but when we look at the alternatives in our organization to potentially be the backup catcher for next year, and we've got Markley making the minimum versus Ogata making $1.8 million, although Ogata is certainly better defensively, he's a much worse hitter, a weaker arm, and as we know, he's demonstrated that he's just not really a major league hitter. So to be spending an extra $1.1 million on Ogata versus someone like Markley is a tough pill for me to swallow. Amari Cephas in our organization is a guy who I would say could be in the mix if we have an injury at catcher the next few years. Not nearly as good an arm as Markley. A little bit better defensively, certainly. The bat overall not quite as good. Markley's ability to draw walks definitely gives him a little bit of an advantage. Don't think any of these guys are perfect, but I do think that Markley is likely the best option out there, so we're going to explore how to bring him on board. And there are a lot of options out there for Mendic. Still a good, solid major league left-handed reliever. Just with some of the youth we have in our organization and the recent trade we made for another young left-handed pitcher, paying a guy like Mendic $5 million next year when he's wrecked physically, when we've got cheaper options in our organization as lefty relievers that are probably close to as good, seems like, given the financial constraints that we're dealing with, makes sense to move on from him. As I mentioned, a lot of different options and multiple catchers besides Markley are being offered to us for him. But Markley, to me, is the guy who fits with what we want to do best. And Mendic is gone for Markley. We were also able to give the Tigers to give us some more money in cash, so we should be in a good situation to be able to have some flexibility in the draft next year, as well as strong investments in scouting and player development at this point with the cash that we've added through trades and also the expenses that we've gotten off of the books for next year with the deals that we've made as well. The fans not happy that Mendic's gone, so that unfortunately cost us another couple points in terms of fan interest, given that we're not going to be doing too much in free agency, most likely. Kind of is what it is in terms of fan interest, and a likely hit to coming up, as we've talked about, with the loss of Mendoza in the not-too-distant future. And who knows, maybe we'll even take a hit when the rental closer Padilla leaves as well. But like I said, it is what it is on that front. But think that with Markley on board, we can now move on from Ogata. Unfortunately, there's really no trade value there, so it's really just getting a placeholder for $1.8 million off of the books and ultimately not having that financial commitment to Hidetaka Ogata next year. And Jonah Richards is your American League Rookie of the Year. Not surprising. I'd say the most surprising thing is probably for a guy who won, as we noted, 4 out of 6 Rookie of the Month awards, that he had some legitimate competition from second baseman Ben Home Plate Costello of the Red Sox, who did have a monster rookie season, led the league with a .336 batting average, also led the league with 61 doubles, and tied for the league lead with 8 triples. So a 6.1 WAR for the 23-year-old Ben Costello, number 46 prospect in baseball. He already was an All-Star and won a Silver Slugger this year. So although Richards won the Rookie of the Year, Richards did not get an All-Star nod or a Silver Slugger award. Just a reminder on what Richards did. Hit .285, 38 homers, 114 ribbies, also scored over 100 runs, put up a 146 WRC plus, primarily as a DH for us, but also spent a little time behind the plate and at first base, and even started one game for us at third. But he will likely be our starting catcher next year, and the new addition, Markley, will be his backup in all probability. And our long national nightmare is over. Steve Genis, who had won 7 consecutive American League Cy Young Awards, did get one first-place vote this year, had a nice season, 16-11, led the league in innings pitched, strikeouts, and put up a 7.3 WAR. But the streak is over, and it's our guy who broke it. Federico Ariola led the league in wins, ERA, and WHIP. 5.9 WAR for Ariola on the season. Made his first All-Star team this year. Was very disappointing, unfortunately, in the playoffs. He was the losing pitcher in both games 1 and Game 5 of our disappointing 5-game loss, 3-2 to the Chicago White Sox. But he does get the hardware as being the American League Cy Young Award winner here in 2041. Alejandro Espinoza of the Royals, 17-4 with a 2.92 ERA, led the league in quality start percentage, FIP minus, and WAR, second in the voting. And Michael Griswold, 22-year-old with the Red Sox, who was the number 5 overall pick just 4 years ago. Only a 12-13 record, but struck out over 200 batters with an ERA of under 3 and a 7 WAR on the season. So some very good young pitchers in the American League this year, led by our Federico Ariola. And the streak of Cy Young Awards for Steve Jenis of the Texas Rangers, which ran from 2034 to 2040, ends at 7 in a row. And taking a look at the other big awards in the National League, Andy Grimes was your unanimous Cy Young Award winner. The 25-year-old, 20 wins, led the league for the second straight year. 217 innings pitched, led the league. 318 strikeouts, led the league for a second straight year. A league best 2.03 ERA, 0.94 WHIP. Half a homer per 9 innings, 13.2 strikeout to walk ratio, 87.1 quality start percentage, 42 FIP minus, and a impressive 10.6 WAR, as Andy Grimes is now a back-to-back Cy Young Award winner. Maybe he's looking to start a streak similar to what we've seen from Steve Jenis with this absolutely imposing 5-pitch arsenal that Grimes has. Definitely seems like he should be in the mix for MVP awards, or Cy Young awards certainly, and possibly MVP awards for many years to come. Over in the National League, though, your MVP is Dan Thompson of the Cardinals. Grimes did get 4 first-place votes, but Dan Thompson of the Cardinals, third baseman, Sungo, led the league with 204 hits, a 337 average. Also led the league in on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, WRC+, and an 8.1 WAR, as Dan Thompson, who was your National League Rookie of the Year in 2037, now has added a Most Valuable Player award to his trophy case. Mike Ramsey, our old friend, the outstanding two-way player with the Atlanta Braves, definitely an off year for him on the mound at the age of 30, a 9-10 record with a 4.70 ERA. Still did strike out 251 batters and still led the league with a 6 strikeout to walk ratio. 5.8 WAR as a pitcher. If he continues doing that for another few seasons, he is certainly going to continue to burnish his impressive Hall of Fame credentials as a pitcher. But no question that it was a bit of a down year for him. That 332 BABIP did not help. You can see his trophy case here full of both Most Valuable Player awards and Cy Young awards. And with the bat this year, only a 110 WRC plus offensively from Ramsey. That said, still had 25 homers and 78 ribbies in 134 games. Still put up a 3.1 WAR as a position player. But despite his durability and despite his outstanding skill set, definitely looks like age is beginning to catch up slightly with Ramsey. That said, he is still one of the best players in all of baseball. Over in the American League, your unanimous Most Valuable Player was Gregorio Villarreal. You may remember he also won the Division Series MVP award when the White Sox took us out in that disappointing playoff performance from our Oakland A's this year. All Villarreal did was lead the league in hits, runs batted in, WRC plus, and 8.4 WAR. So an outstanding season for Villarreal, and he adds an MVP award to his 2038 AL Rookie of the Year award. A lot of attention for our Oakland A's, though. Luis Godina, the first baseman, DH, second in the voting. Darnell Selvey, the left fielder, third in the voting. Jonah Richards, the Rookie of the Year, who this year was a DH/first baseman. As we've talked about extensively at this point, he is our catcher of the future, though. He also got some votes. Our Cy Young Award winner, Federico Ariola. Current catcher likely to leave us, Jorge Mendoza, also got votes as well. So not surprising to see a lot of Oakland Athletics, including, last but not least, our third baseman, Juan Pimentel, getting support for the American League Most Valuable Player this year after a season in which we put up a 108-54 record. And in the least surprising news ever, Jorge Mendoza has declined his qualifying offer to become a free agent. He was looking for well over $30 million a year for 9 or 10 years from us. So no surprise that he's going to be leaving. Had a very nice run with us over the last 4.5 seasons. Definitely got everything we could have hoped to get out of him. Part of a couple World Series championship teams with us since he came on board. Perennial All-Star. A year ago, he was the ALCS and the World Series MVP. I guess it was only 3.5 seasons he was with us. My math was not good on the fly. I was thinking of, I think, Chase Dora when I said 4.5 seasons that he was with us for someone who worked out well as a rental, but Mendoza really only with us for 3.5 years, but still very productive. And with the development of Jonah Richards, we're going to go younger and cheaper for the time being at catcher. And not that we expect to be major players in free agency, but we have made it there on the major league level. No surprise, Mendoza and our rental closer Padilla among the best players available. Don't think, as I've talked about, that we're going to be doing much of anything, particularly at the high end of the market in major league free agency. Always interested in who might be coming over in terms of international free agents, though. So we'll take a quick look at the prospects there. Catcher Takehisa Ishii looks like a useful-ish backup catcher. Very borderline as a starting catcher, looking for $10 million a year. Going to be 33 years old soon. Don't think that's a direction that we will pursue seriously. Third baseman Jesus Wolverine Villalobos. Decent looking third baseman, looking for $7 million, but he's going to be 34 before the season begins. Not a big need for us with Pimentel at third base. Last but not least, shortstop Luis Lizarraga, another guy in his early 30s, looking for $16 million. Good influence in the clubhouse, pretty average-ish looking bat, although he will draw some walks, and a decent glove, although not necessarily a perfect glove with that 55 range and 55 arm for a shortstop. So I don't think we're likely to be major players in free agency this year, but do like what we've done in terms of bringing in a little bit more youth into our organization through some trades. Certainly wish Huntley and Mendic the best as pitchers with their new teams. It'll be interesting to see where Mendoza ends up, and definitely will miss having Alejandro Landin in the lineup. We're going to have an open competition for shortstop next year. As we talked about, Swenson in the mix, Cinder in the mix, and pivoting Chisin Iwata over to shortstop is certainly an option as well, depending on how things work out. But I think it was the right time to move on from Alejandro Landin, and we'll find out if after a second consecutive offseason where we lost some very key players to free agency and also traded away some pretty important players that were starting to make significant money, if we can continue to deliver 100-plus wins on the field in the season after those big transitions. But still a lot of work to do this offseason before we'll start finding out how 2042 goes. And we will continue on that path towards the new year and the new season in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.